Canada est maintenant en place. Il a un seul objectif.
Mark Carney's government has set a major target for 2030. Protect 30% of Canada's land and waters. But there's one number that makes this story a lot more complicated. Canada had set an interim target of 25% by 2025. And it didn't get there. Now the government has a bigger target. A bigger investment. And less time. Canada currently conserves roughly 13.8% of its terrestrial land and inland waters. Terrestrial, terrestrial. On the marine side, the figure is about 15.5%. And now the goal is 30% by 2030. To help get there, the government has announced $3.8 billion in new nature funding. But here's the bigger question. If Canada reaches 30% by 2030, does that automatically mean Canada's nature is better protected? Or could Canada end up celebrating a number that looks impressive on a map, while delivering much less impact on the ground? Today, we're going to follow that question. From the government's plan, to the money, the beneficiaries, the costs, the evidence, and what could actually happen by 2030. Forget 30% for a moment. Because the most interesting number in this story isn't actually 30. It's 13.8%. By the end of 2024, Canada was conserving roughly 13.8% of its terrestrial land and inland waters. On the marine side, it was about 15.5%. Now look at the target. 30% by 2030. That means conservation has to accelerate dramatically over the next few years. And there's another problem. Canada already missed an important milestone. The 25% interim target for 2025 was not achieved. So the real question becomes, can a new $3.8 billion strategy close a gap that the previous plan failed to close? To understand that, we first need to look at what the government is actually planning. Canada's new A Force of Nature strategy includes $3.8 billion in investment. The broader objective is to bring conservation to 30% by 2030. But the government isn't relying on just one type of protected area. The strategy includes tools such as national parks, national urban parks, marine conservation areas, indigenous-led conservation, and OECMs. OECMs, or other effective area-based conservation measures, are areas that may not be traditional protected areas, but can still deliver effective biodiversity conservation outcomes. Biodiversity, biodiversity. And this distinction matters. Because conservation isn't simply about counting how much land appears inside a protected boundary. Canada's conservation framework also focuses on things like biodiversity, ecological representation, and connectivity. And this is where findings from the Auditor General become important. A 2025 audit identified gaps in previous progress and planning, including concerns around ecological representation, connectivity, and ensuring meaningful biodiversity outcomes. So the government really has two challenges. How much area can it conserve? And how effective will that conservation actually be? For Mark Carney's federal government, 30 by 30 is more than an environmental promise. It comes with billions of dollars, multiple conservation programs, and a fixed 2030 deadline. But Ottawa cannot do this alone. The government will have to work with Indigenous governments, indigenous provinces, territories, local communities, and conservation organizations. There's also a structural problem. The federal government controls only around 6% of Canada's land. So Ottawa can't simply decide to designate 30% of the country on its own. It needs partnerships, agreements, and long-term cooperation. That means 30 by 30 isn't just a federal government target. It's a Canada-wide coordination test. Because on paper, reaching 30% can sound relatively straightforward. On the ground, the questions are much harder. Which land gets protected? How will it be managed? Who makes the decisions? And what activities will still be allowed? This is where environmental goals can collide with economic interests. A particular area might be extremely important for biodiversity, while also being important for local economies, resource development, recreation, or traditional land use, fishing, forestry, mining, tourism, land use. When conservation rules change, some communities could gain new opportunities. Others could face restrictions or additional costs. So the real challenge of 30 by 30 isn't simply reaching a percentage. It's balancing competing priorities. And that brings us to the next question. Who actually benefits? If the government is putting $3.8 billion into this strategy, the obvious question is, who actually benefits from that investment? One of the most important groups is indigenous communities. The 30 by 30 strategy gives indigenous-led conservation and stewardship an important role. That means indigenous governments and communities aren't simply participants in conservation. In many cases, they can play a leadership role. But the benefits don't stop there. Local and rural communities can benefit from tourism, recreation, and related economic activity around protected areas. Visitors arrive. Hotels and campsites benefit. Restaurants and local businesses get more customers. Guides and recreational operators can gain new opportunities. And the broader economy can benefit from healthy ecosystems in ways that are less visible. Clean water, climate resilience, resilience, healthy ecosystems, natural resources. So the government is presenting conservation not just as environmental protection, but also as a potential economic investment. But those benefits won't necessarily be evenly distributed. Some industries could face tighter restrictions. Some communities could face adjustment costs. So understanding the benefits also means understanding who pays the price. The government's $3.8 billion investment is a major public commitment. But conservation costs don't end when an area receives protected status. After that comes monitoring, management, enforcement, long-term stewardship. And that creates a much bigger financial question. If Canada conserves thousands of additional areas by 2030, what will it cost to manage them over the following decades? And who will pay? The federal government, provinces, territories, indigenous governments, local partners, or broader public budgets? That's why it would be misleading to think of $3.8 billion as the total lifetime cost. It's a major investment. But the real financial test begins after the designation. Can Canada afford to manage these conserved areas effectively for decades? If the strategy works, the impact could go far beyond a bigger percentage on a map. Canada could see more protected habitats, stronger biodiversity protection, better ecological connectivity, greater indigenous participation, and more opportunities for tourism and recreation. On the marine side, healthier ecosystems could also contribute to greater ocean resilience. But eventually, these benefits have to be measured. Creating a protected area is one thing. Showing that ecological conditions actually improve is another. And that brings us to the evidence. By the end of 2024, Canada was conserving roughly 13.8% of its terrestrial land and inland waters, and 15.5% of its marine areas. Then came another problem. Canada did not reach its 25% interim target for 2025. And in November 2025, an Auditor General audit raised additional concerns. Federal organizations were not on track with the previous terrestrial target. And the audit identified gaps in planning around ecological representation, connectivity, and biodiversity outcomes for the 2030 goal. Now, this does not prove that 30% is impossible. But it does send a warning. Setting a target and successfully implementing that target are two very different things. The government now has a bigger strategy, more funding, and a clear deadline. But it also has a record of missing the previous milestone. Closing that gap will be one of the biggest tests between now and 2030. Now imagine it's 2030. The government makes the announcement. Canada has reached 30%. The headlines appear. The maps come out. The number gets celebrated. But then, the harder questions begin. What exactly was conserved? Were the most important habitats protected? Did biodiversity actually improve? Are ecosystems better connected? Did indigenous communities gain meaningful leadership? Did local communities see measurable economic benefits? And are these protected areas actually being managed effectively? That's the real test of 2030. The question won't simply be, did Canada reach 30%? It will be, what did that 30% actually deliver? And this is where the biggest debate around 30 by 30 comes in. Quantity versus quality. Tools like OECMs can help expand the amount of area counted toward conservation targets. But simply counting an area doesn't automatically prove that biodiversity outcomes are strong. So one question is likely to become increasingly important. Is Canada measuring how much area it protects? Or is it measuring what that protection actually achieves? Then there's the coordination problem. The federal government controls only a relatively small share of Canada's total land. So without cooperation from provinces, territories, and indigenous governments, the national target becomes much harder to achieve. In other words, 30 by 30 isn't an Ottawa-only project. It's a Canada-wide coordination challenge. Now look at the whole picture. Canada has around 13.8% terrestrial conservation. The target is 30%. The 25% interim target was missed. The government has announced $3.8 billion. Indigenous partnerships are central. Provincial and territorial cooperation is essential. OECMs can play a role in expanding conservation. And the Auditor General has identified gaps in previous planning and ecological outcomes. Put all of that together, and the central challenge becomes clear. Canada doesn't just need to conserve more area. It needs to make that conservation effective, measurable, and long-term. So what could 2030 actually look like? There are at least 3 possible paths. Government funding is deployed effectively. Provinces and territories cooperate. Indigenous-led conservation expands. Protected areas and OECMs are properly managed. And biodiversity outcomes improve. In that scenario, 30% would represent a genuine conservation achievement. Canada makes significant progress. More areas are conserved. Investment continues. But approvals, partnerships, and implementation aren't fast enough to reach the full target. Canada ends up below 30%. In that case, the government will have to answer a simple question. Why was the target missed, and what comes next? This may be the most interesting scenario. Canada somehow reaches the 30% threshold. The headline looks like a success. But then the questions begin. Did biodiversity improve? Are important ecosystems properly represented? Are protected areas connected? Is management effective? Did local communities actually benefit? If the answers are weak, Canada may technically achieve the target without fully achieving the broader conservation goal. And this is where the 30 by 30 story becomes much bigger than an environmental target. It becomes a test of whether the government can turn public money into long-term national outcomes. If $3.8 billion helps create stronger ecosystems, meaningful indigenous partnerships, local economic opportunities, and measurable biodiversity improvements, then this isn't simply conservation spending. It's a long-term national investment. But if success becomes nothing more than 30% complete, then Canada risks losing an important distinction. Protecting an area is not automatically the same as protecting nature. So when Canada announces its final 30 by 30 results in 2030, what should count as success? Is it enough to say 30% of Canada's land and waters are now counted as conserved? Or should the government also have to prove that? Biodiversity improved. Ecosystems became healthier. Indigenous communities gained meaningful roles. Local economies benefited. And protected areas were effectively managed. Because at the end of the day, 30% is the target. But the real question is what that 30% actually delivers. Canada has until 2030 to reach 30%. But reaching 30% won't be the end of the story. It will be the beginning of the real test. Because a government can achieve a percentage, but a country can only claim real conservation success when that percentage translates into measurable results on the ground. The real success of 30 by 30 won't be found in the number alone. It will be found in what that number means for Canada's nature, its communities, and its future.